Tonight, putting any rumors to rest.
Ken Paxton came out and shut them down.
Suspended Attorney General Ken Paxton says he will not resign ahead of his impeachment trial. Plus, the Republican National Convention is headed to Houston in 2028.
It showcases how well-run a Republican state is and what those policies deliver for Americans.
Why the choice of a Democratic city in a red state is significant for the GOP. And later, a trial date is set for former President Donald Trump's federal election interference case in the height of the 2024 presidential primary. Capitol Tonight starts right now. Thanks for joining us here on Capitol Tonight. I'm Karina Klang. Wrong. That's the message suspended Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has over rumors he plans to resign. He posted this on social media Saturday in response to a tweet that claimed there was credible chatter that he will step down to avoid testifying at his impeachment trial that starts next week. It appears to be the first public comment on impeachment since Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick imposed a gag order on those involved in the trial last month. Even if Paxton does resign, a source close to the Texas House impeachment managers say they plan to proceed with the trial regardless. But as we inch closer to the trial, some Paxton supporters are putting pressure on certain senators to end it before it officially begins. Charlotte Scott reports.
Pressure is mounting on Republican senators ahead of suspended Attorney General Ken Paxton's impeachment trial. They'll serve as jurors who will determine Paxton's political future. That's led some conservative groups defending Paxton to step in.
So I think that senators should be willing to listen to the will of their voters.
Some conservatives and Paxton's attorneys argue voters re-elected Paxton knowing he was accused of wrongdoing. Luke Macias with the conservative pro-Paxton Political Action Committee, Defend Texas Liberty, says that's why they're encouraging Texans to call their Republican senator to push them to acquit Paxton.
So I think it's completely appropriate for any individual to reach out to their elected officials if they think there's any chance that they would vote with Democrats instead of with the will of Republican voters.
But the House impeachment lawyers say voters didn't know everything and have laid out new allegations.
We don't think it's appropriate for anybody to be calling on their senator to vote a certain way in this trial. We need to let it unfold, and we need to let the facts determine the outcome.
In May, a majority of House Republicans voted to impeach Paxton. Defend Texas Liberty went after those members, and now the PAC's leader says any Republican senator who votes to convict Paxton is risking their political career. One political science professor disagrees.
I think it is unlikely that you would see elections for the state legislature next year center on the fate of an impeached and removed attorney general whose fate was decided more than a year previously. I think that's a little bit far-fetched.
Defend Texas Liberty donated $3 million to Republican Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick earlier this year. As the head of the Senate, Patrick will preside over the impeachment trial, but Macias says this wasn't an attempt to influence him.
The donations we've given out are purely in support of all the conservative policy that was passed in the Senate.
Paxton has denied all wrongdoing. His legal team calls the impeachment trial a sham, but some influential Republicans are also saying let the process play out. Former Governor Rick Perry wrote in an op-ed that senators should allow for a full and fair trial. It will begin on September 5th. For Capitol Tonight, I'm Charlotte Scott.
Lieutenant Governor Patrick named a new judge to help him with the impeachment trial. Former state appeals court judge Lana Myers will serve as a consult to Patrick. This comes after Patrick's first pick, former Judge Mark Brown, did not work out due to questions about his past political donations. Joining us now is Mike Golden. He's a former trial lawyer and now serves as Director of Advocacy at the University of Texas School of Law. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. How do you think the pressure the GOP senators are getting could potentially affect this trial?
Well, I think it's important to remember that while it looks like a trial, and while we're all calling it a trial, it is, of course, a political process. And it's part of, in our Constitution, part of the political process. So we're going to see pressure on both sides for the GOP senators, and to be fair, for the Democratic senators too, to see what it is that their constituents want them to be considering when they're thinking about guilt or not guilty.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked so much about how, and even the lieutenant governor has called this a political trial. What kind of ethical concerns do you think could be raised throughout this trial if lawmakers are getting donations from Paxton supporters or even maybe on the opposite side, the detractors?
Well, again, the process itself doesn't prohibit that, but I think what's kind of important to remember is we would certainly like as a state, however the process turns out, not only to avoid impropriety, but the appearance of impropriety, because that really helps people feel like there was a fair trial and that the issues, we all got to the bottom of it. And so I do think that as you see campaign contributions, and of course there was a large one to the lieutenant governor, that's going to cause people to wonder whether this is really a fair process or not.
What if Paxton is forced to testify? I mean, his team is saying he won't. The House impeachment managers are trying to get him to take the stand. He's obviously a potential witness that they are wanting to call. What if Paxton is forced to testify?
So if Paxton testifies, and I think my bet is that even if he is required to testify, that he will choose not to. But if he is forced to testify, anything he says in this proceeding can be used against him in other proceedings. And as we know, there are criminal proceedings currently pending in Harris County. There's a civil lawsuit that was settled and now is no longer settled, pending here in Austin. And that kind of evidence could potentially be gold to other prosecutors, to the plaintiff's lawyers in that lawsuit, or possibly federal prosecutors in the future.
Yeah, I mean, speaking to that, I guess also just to the extent, what if he pleads the fifth? I mean, what does that look like for Paxton?
So in a proceeding like this, what it's going to look like, I think, is a lot of time spent in closing argument by either Rusty Hardin or Dick DeGuerin arguing to the senators he wouldn't have pleaded the fifth if he didn't have something to hide. But in a criminal context, like his future criminal trial, that pleading the fifth can't be used against him.
What else, just in terms of, we've seen, you know, the 4,000 pages, nearly 4,000 pages of evidence that the House impeachment managers put out, just in terms of heading into this trial, are you going to be watching most closely?
Well, I think what's going to be interesting to see is the type of presentation that the managers, the House managers put on, because they are, in theory, pitching to a pro-Paxton audience. Now, we know that the House, which is also heavily Republican, voted to impeach, so here we are. But I think that the themes and the theories that the House managers' lawyers use are going to be the most interesting thing, at least at the beginning, to see how they try to really drive home why removal is necessary.
We've seen, you know, the leak of the potential witness list. I mean, with regards to that, Senator Angela Paxton is on there, from Paxton's team actually wanting to call her, as well as another senator. What about just the Senator Brian Hughes, who is also a potential witness, just having him be called to the stand and then potentially voting on this?
Well, this is a great illustration of why this is a political process and not a judicial process. In a trial court, we simply do not allow jurors who have any personal investment or knowledge in the case. But the way the Constitution works and the way the Senate has written the rules, senators who have important, and I think the rules actually say, information you can't get anywhere else, information, can be called to testify and still don't lose their right to be participants, be members of the court, and to vote.
Yeah, well, we are all going to be watching it play out starting September 5th. Mike Golden, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Let's get a check now of some of the other political stories making headlines. A new complaint seeks to stop Paxton from practicing law in Texas. A group of attorneys filed a complaint with the State Bar of Texas, citing the same allegations of abuse of office and other misconduct Paxton will face next month in his impeachment trial. They're asking the State Bar to investigate.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. And for more refreshing stories about your community, click the subscribe button right over here. You can also download our Spectrum News app to get live news coverage, weather alerts, and more wherever you are. And don't forget to tune in to Channel 55 on Dish and DirecTV for live local reporting every single day. We'll see you then.